Welcome back to the meeting of the Senate Committee on Agriculture on April 5th. We're joined by Steve Collier, Christina Sweet, and Abby Willard from the agency. And we're going to talk about their budget, or at least a portion of their budget. I'll let them explain it. Steve, it's good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you so much. Again, Steve Collier from the Agency of Agriculture. Thanks so much for having us. So I hope you'll indulge me for a moment to talk about why we think this is so important. And it's going to be a maybe more than you need, because you're all experts in this committee and we understand how much you know the needs of Vermont agriculture. But we really think that we're at an inflection point. We just had the pandemic, 3 years ago. I think during that time we learned again the importance of local food production, the importance of local agriculture, the importance that Vermont maintain its agricultural status and state. And we have this unusual circumstance where, because of all the federal dollars that have been rolling out through the country, and because of the relative success of our state receipts, we have this one-time money that is really almost never available. And so you all have to make really difficult decisions about how to meet all of the competing needs. And we understand there are competing needs. You can't underestimate the importance of homelessness and the need for housing. You can't underestimate the importance of the need for education and for care of the elderly and for supporting all of those Vermonters who are disadvantaged and need help. But we also think there really isn't anything more important than agriculture when you get down to its core. If you don't have food, we can't survive. And I think as more and more of us have become distant from farming, and as more and more of us are just ignorant about all of, and not just through our lifestyle. I look at my own life. My grandparents on both sides were farmers. My parents were not farmers, but I grew up in rural Vermont. I worked on farms. I had all exposure to farms. I had friends who were farmers. I was on farms all the time. My kids don't know anything about farms. That is I think that's a reality throughout the state and throughout this country. We are fortunate, though, right now in Vermont, that we still have a vibrant agricultural state. We have incredible producers. We have world-renowned products. We have a base. As far as I understand it, we're the only New England state where 5% or more of our GDP is from agriculture. It's important to think about, because New England is not an easy agricultural region. We're a mountainous state, we're a cold state, we have a short growing season. It's not easy to compete in Vermont against the Midwest farms, the California farms, the Florida farms, the ones that have more favorable conditions, that have economies of scale that we can never seek to replicate. Despite that, Vermont farmers have done very well by emphasizing quality and by emphasizing, that rural ethic. And to us, it's more than agriculture, it's our rural communities. We don't want to be a state where the only people who can afford to live in rural areas are those who earn their living elsewhere. We think that to be a vibrant state, we've got to be able to give opportunities to the people who live in those rural communities to make their living there. And the way to do that is through working lands. And Vermonters have shown their ability over generations to do that. To talk to you all about this, because this is all about the future. This is the whole point of this budget request, is the future. So I thought it'd be interesting to look back. And I went back to in our vault, we have the old agricultural yearbooks. And I went back to 1923. I'm not sure I interpreted everything right, because they called things pretty differently at that point. But at that time, we had 18,000 dairy farms in the state. 18,000. About half of them were producing cream, and the other half were producing milk. We had 210 creameries that were processing milk and cream and butter and cheese. So when you think about 18,000 farms, right, that's about 100 farms for every legislator. I don't know if there were 180 legislators back then or not, but about 100 farms for every legislator.
No, there's 240.
There were 240 back then.
And 30 in the Senate, so you had
Okay.
beyond that, so.
So when you have 18,000 dairy farms, that gives you an idea of how pervasive and how important that was to Vermont at the time. That meant that everybody was part of a farming family through one way or another. Everybody understood farming. Everybody appreciated farming. Right now, we have 514 dairy farms. What's most stark to me about that is at the beginning of the pandemic in January of 2020, we had 649 farms. So in the last dairy farm, this is cow dairies, it's not all farms, but in keeping in mind, the reason we focus on dairy and part of the reason we're looking at the future is that it's still our most important industry. It's still, dairy farms manage about 80% of our agricultural land. They bring in over 70% of our agricultural revenues. It remains the base of Vermont farming. Now, interestingly, back in that 1923 yearbook, what I saw was that there were all of those 18,000 farms combined had about 988 million pounds of milk. Now today, with only 514 farms, we're producing about 2.5 billion pounds of milk. So we have far fewer farms, but we're producing about 2.5 times the milk. So it's not like all of this is, some of this is a success story. Vermont farms remain vibrant and some of them remain profitable, but they are dwindling precipitously. And back to the pandemic, we've lost 21% of our remaining dairy farms in 3 years, 21%. So at some point, you get to the point where you don't have the critical mass to maintain the infrastructure. If you don't have enough farms, then you don't have the equipment dealers, you don't have the seed dealers, you don't have the fertilizer dealers. You've got to have an agricultural core to remain vibrant. And when you have a cold weather state like we do, that means you have to have something that can operate year round. Produce, incredibly important. Vegetables, incredibly important, but they're not very efficient or to grow in January. Some people do it, but it's a challenge and it's energy intensive. So I just think it's important. If back in the 1800s, we were all sheep farms, right? And then we transitioned to dairy, and we had 18,000 dairy farms 100 years ago, 514 today. So when you think about what does it mean to be an agricultural state, you know, we could easily become Southern New Hampshire. We could easily become Southern Maine. We could become a place where everyone who's coming to Vermont is doing that to come to their second home, or they're telecommuting, which is going to become more and more prevalent. You know, I wonder about our rural landscapes when people no longer have to work in a Manhattan office, which we welcome everyone. We want everyone to come to Vermont. But if you don't have the agricultural base in Vermont, it's going to be a changed state. And so we are very worried about agriculture in Vermont withering if it's not tended. And that is the whole point of this budget request. It's trying to capitalize on this moment in time when we can evaluate what's happened during the pandemic. We can evaluate our priorities. You know, so much attention on ag in recent years has been on how do you preserve what you have, and how do you deal with the agricultural impacts of agriculture, both for water quality and climate. Those are really important issues, and no one in our agency is trying to minimize them. But they ignore the threshold question, which is how do you support agriculture itself? You know, yes, we have to deal with the impacts, but if we don't have agriculture, then we're just pushing those impacts on someone else. And we're also losing our own ability to have flourishing rural communities. I mean, that's what this is about. It's not just our food, which we need, but it's about having rural communities that can prosper. You know, we know that our kids grow up in Vermont and they leave, and some of them come back. One of the biggest challenges we face right now is all of that expertise that we have in Vermont that's been cultivated over centuries of farmers. You know, those 18,000 farm families that have been whittled down to 514, they have that knowledge, that generational knowledge is pivotal to farming success. Most kids who grow up in Vermont now don't want to work 7 days a week. Most kids don't want to put in what it takes to be a farmer. So if we can't entice this next generation, whether they're moving in from other places or whether they're growing up here, if we can't encourage them, entice them to become engaged in Vermont agriculture, we're not going to have it. And that's what the whole point of this budget request is about, is that we, and through the Governor's Commission on the Future of Vermont Agriculture, which the Governor Commission, which Secretary Tebbets and Lindsay Curley from ACCP have chaired, which Abby's been instrumental on, this group of people came together to evaluate Vermont agriculture and its future, and to say, what can we do? And this is not about dairy. This request is not about dairy. It's about transitioning. We believe we need to have dairy, but we need more. We can't just have dairy. So the whole point of this request is to prioritize state funds to give to those producers in 3 areas where we've identified, and the Future of Ag Commission identified, are poised for growth, but they lack critical infrastructure. And that's meat and produce and maple. And the meat industry, we've talked about a lot of times in this committee and other places, it needs processing. We can have more people raising small ruminants. We can have more farmers transitioning from dairy to beef or raising hogs. But if you don't have the place to process those animals, then it's not a very lucrative endeavor. And so it's very, very expensive to have meat processing. We have some, we need more. So we just believe this is an area where if you want to encourage people, and even, and it doesn't mean necessarily get out of dairy, but to add, additive. Okay, I'm going to have 100 beef cattle to supplement my dairy herd because I know milk prices drop, every 2 years or every 3 years, and I need something else, just like farmers have always done with maple, to use that extra cash crop to be able to continue. So meat is one of those areas where we know we need infrastructure development, and we know that development is not covered by current programs. So that's why this budget request is there, is to help develop that industry so it can keep our agricultural traditions going. Produce is another one where we've got a lot of farmers who are very good at growing produce, but it's not enough to grow it. You need to be able to market it. And that means being able to store it in an appropriate cold storage facility. That means being able to process it. That means being able to distribute it. If you have it all rotting in the fields, or if you can collect it, but you can't get it to market, that's not useful. I think the secretary, when he was in here, talked about wanting to get more Vermont produce in Vermont grocery stores. Moving it out of state, but getting it more locally. But to do that, you need infrastructure, and the infrastructure is so expensive. I mean, earlier we were talking about $15,000 grants and how those don't go very far. They don't, and that doesn't mean they're not important. But to make changes that can actually move us forward, it requires significant investment. So we know there are producers out there now who, with the support, with the funding, could bring that industry forward with produce. Maple is the other area that's been targeted. Maple is very successful in Vermont. We produce in Vermont more maple syrup, as I understand it, than the rest of the country combined. We are very successful in the industry, but it's also been recognized and targeted as an area that can be used for so many more things than for pancakes. And so there are many value-added products that maple can contribute to. Some are already being made now. There's also an infrastructure need. You can save, as I understand it, about 20% of your boiling time and your energy consumption by getting a reverse osmosis machine. So you can take out most of the moisture before you boil. Those kinds of improvements are instrumental to helping the dairy industry, but they're expensive. $100,000, I understand, for sort of a typical unit to be able to do that. And when you think about the energy costs that are saved, which is good for the climate and also for the labor and the time, there's just, the commission and the governor have identified these as areas that can help Vermont agriculture remain vibrant. And so we just think at this time when we have this, it's really, in our view, it's a once in a generation opportunity to be able to inject cash, not to try to keep people afloat like the organic dairy farmers, which is important as well, but to actually build for the future. I'm hoping that in 100 years, when somebody looks at the agricultural report, we still have a vibrant agricultural sector in Vermont, and some of that starts now. And if we don't build it, probably not going to happen. And so I hate to pontificate this way. I appreciate your indulgence, But we really do think it's critical to recognize that Vermont food and Vermont rural communities and Vermont agriculture, they deserve attention too. And as Secretary Tebbetts likes to say, who's been involved in the industry forever, it's ag's time. So we appreciate that the House approved $5 million. That's important. But we really believe that the $10 million that the governor proposed is essential at this point in time to helping us build the farm. So, thank you.
Senator Campion?
Thanks, Senator Comer. So can you just bring us back to what it is, what the ask is?
Yeah.
What we're looking at? I jumped in, which was great, but what are you asking for?
Maybe Rich, you can help.
What would be more helpful, and I think it gets at what you, it would be helpful if they had a column, here's what you're asking for and what it would pay for on the sheet. And right beside it, here's what the House put in the comment and comments, so we can have a comparison of what the two proposals are that we're going to be expecting to sort through.
Great.
So I think we could prepare something like that. I think what we're trying to do is put, and Abby Willard and Christina Sweet would be people responsible for running this program, so they can give a lot more details probably than I can. But what we want to do is have grants that range from $100,000 to $500,000 for producers to apply for, that would be competitively awarded within these three sectors. So
The
we
maple, the
produce and meat. So the idea is to be competitively awarded grants within those three sectors. We haven't asked for a specific allocation, meaning a third, and a third, because we would prefer to be able to evaluate the best ones and to pick the best ones and to award them competitively without pigeonholing a certain amount. But I also think, we plan on funding each of these probably roughly equivalently, unless there's some grant applications that are just fantastic. As an example, we want flexibility. It would be wonderful if, for example, produce, the Vermont food and veggie growers came forward and put together an application on behalf of their growers to perhaps develop infrastructure that many Vermont companies could use instead of just one. I'm not saying that we would be open to individual grants or to collective grants, but the idea is to allow the ingenuity and the entrepreneurship of the current practitioners to come forward with the proposals that will get the biggest bang for the buck. And that might include matching in some cases, it might not. We don't want to, we want as much flexibility as possible to use the money as wisely as possible. But if people could work together to build that infrastructure, like with meat processing, that obviously helps a lot of farms, even though it might be one company that's doing it. If there's cold storage or if there's processing that set up in an industrial park, as an example, that a lot of people could utilize in that region, then that could be more helpful. So, our Ag Development Division is wonderful at reaching out to people and getting people involved, at evaluating business plans, at anticipating the future, at evaluating where those funds can go. But that is we can try to put a piece together, but $10 million is not a magic number. It's a number that we think is enough to make a difference. And that is the whole point of this, is infrastructure development that has a meaningful long-term impact. It's important to give a $15,000 grant to a farmer who can transition and keep their land active, but it can be transformative to give a $500,000 grant to a meat processor that can service 50 farms. And so what we want to do is to develop the infrastructure that we know is lacking in all three of these areas, to allow all of our producers who are already there and those who want to come to be able to access that infrastructure to help develop the ag industry. So it's a little bit, hard to say exactly how it would be spent, because a lot of that is we want to encourage the best bids, but it's definitely in developing the infrastructure for these three different sectors. Is that, I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Yeah, it's helpful. It'd be great to see that chart that Senator West asked for. That'd be great.
One of the pluses about being in the Senate is you get to go last when it's in, and you get everybody. And when I look at what the House put out, and what yours, they're all good ideas.
Yeah.
But, you know, quite frankly, the working lands piece, you only got 1/3 of what you asked for.
Right.
And in the 10 million, you got half. And ours is to sort out the differences between the two, and we might have some ideas of our own.
Right.
And then it goes off to a conference committee, but it would be nice to be able to compare what they did versus what you had suggested.
Understood.
And I don't think there's anybody here that doesn't think this is all good ideas.
Yeah, certainly. I want to thank you too for the sort of historic look back at things. And as Senator Westman said, I don't think you're going to find another committee that's as committed to agriculture. Certainly our chair is
Understood.
a champion in that regard. So I don't think you'll have any argument here. We have competing interests, as you are very well aware, with things like childcare and paid family leave and all those big ticket items, so to speak, and much of what has been appropriated and the other body address those needs, and they're important needs too. But we need to fashion a way to respond to what the House set up with some good facts and feelings about where agriculture is headed. So you've keyed in on the three big ones for sure. There's no doubt about that. I appreciate all that the agency does all the time. I think you guys do a great job for Vermonters. I think given your resources, you know, you put to work some really good ideas for us, and we appreciate that.
Well,
Do you have something to say?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind. I'm curious how our per capita spending on ag in Vermont compares to other states. Because we are, I think, competing against other places. And not just ag states maybe, but I am very well aware we don't have a critical mass of people to fund just about anything here in Vermont. But when it comes down to try to prioritize how we stay marketable, how we stay in the game throughout the US, how do we compare it, you know?
That's a
Or
great,
could that be added to the chart maybe?
that's a wonderful question. I don't have the answer. I don't know if Abby
I
or
don't know.
Christina may, but I do think from our perspective at least, until recently, and since the pandemic, there's been a lot of federal money that has gone to supporting agriculture. Our perspective at least is that historically, there has not been very much money. There's been favorable policies, which are also critically important, but I don't think there's been a lot of money given. I don't think Vermont has a history of giving much money to business development in general. Now that people may disagree with that, but this is, I do think this is a unique opportunity to target the future and to, you know, other than New York's very much an agricultural state. Maine is very much a fisheries state. It has some agriculture, but most of New England has not. We're the most successful agricultural state in New England. So we're doing something right. But I think a lot of that is our traditions of having those farmers and that infrastructure. And as the median age of our farmers is something like 57 median age, so that means half of them are over 57. It's very concerning about who's going to step up, because we're not seeing a real readiness to put in that time commitment.
Yeah, it's a work ethic too, I think.
It is,
Right?
it is.
Senator
Thank you. Do we know what kind of ARPA funds we gave to farms? Do we know that number?
So that, Christina, please correct me if I'm wrong. I don't believe we at our agency have given ARPA funds to farms. We did give coronavirus relief funds to farms, which were the initial batch of federal money
Okay.
that came out in 2020. And those were very much replacing proven losses.
Yeah.
So because the milk, as the biggest example, the milk price dropped, the floor dropped
Yeah,
down the
yeah,
price
yeah.
immediately once the pandemic, because there was considerably reduced consumption.
Yeah,
And so we had a program that supplemented the price to make it what it would have been absent the pandemic. So the whole point of that initial coronavirus relief funds was to keep businesses in operation. So it was not just in agriculture.
yeah. Do you remember what that number was?
We put out
I
about
remember it was
30, we had a $34 million, I think, in total programs, and maybe we didn't put out 500,000 out of it, maybe, but we had 25 million, I believe, in dairy,
7 million dairy.
27, and 8.5 million for other non-dairy ag businesses. And so but that was all based on compensating for provable losses. It was not anything about investment in the future. It was like, you lost, $100,000 because of the pandemic. Here's your $100,000 check. And there was caps on that actually too. I think our biggest grant was 100,
That's right.
60, it was like a 60 and 100 level.
Of 500 dairies, you gave out 28 million, but the largest grant to a dairy was $100,000.
That's my memory, is that LFOs, it was based on your size, farm size. And these were maximums.
Yeah.
So you still had to prove the losses up to that point. I think LFOs were 100, medium were either 56 or 60. I think small farms were 19, and then there was a certified maybe at 38 or something. I can't remember exactly, but those are caps, not automatics, if you
Sure.
can prove that amount of losses. And that's why I think we had a little bit of money left over, because I think some of the small farms did
Yeah.
not prove the total loss up to
Got
the
it.
cap.
That's what they, yeah.
But and in terms of ARPA, their ACCD, ACCD, the Agency for Commerce and Community Development, has had business grants that all businesses are eligible for, including farms potentially. So I'm sure that some farms have gotten some types of ARPA funding. There's a CIG grant, Community Investment.
Oh, yeah,
Perhaps
That's right,
grant.
that's right.
I think that had a $40 million pool. I have no idea what's been allocated or how many farms, but you were eligible again based on the federal parameters of whether or not you met those. And we didn't
That's helpful,
administer that,
thank you.
but we haven't.
We do have some, so Abby Willard, Agency of Agriculture, for the record, we do have some ARPA award opportunities that we just haven't finalized. So the agency
Okay.
has some ARPA money for the Working Lands Program, so we have 2 million, we're making the final decisions on 1 million of those, like, as we speak this month. There was also money for the Dairy Margin Coverage Program for the dairy community that was ARPA money. Climate Smart Practices within our Water Quality Division received some ARPA money, and then they also received some other ARPA resources to help support like best management practices on from a water quality standpoint. But all of those programs are still like sort of like being launched and being, built, or awards are being considered, applications are being considered. So I think Steve's correct. We have not released any ARPA money directly to farms yet, but it's in process.
Okay.
Except for that Vermont COVID assistance program in the heat of the pandemic.
Is there some place where it's compiled what the feds do, for example, the grant programs through NRCS and all of that with what the state programs are, so we get a holistic picture of what is coming into agriculture in the state and farmers here?
It's a great.
Because I know some of this, you administer some of the federal programs too with some of our ag agency employees. But I haven't ever seen, and I'm not as up on it as I probably could be, but I haven't seen any place where we get a holistic picture of everything that's coming.
Great. In terms of the USDA, obviously, the most significant program that I'm aware of is the Dairy Margin Coverage Program, which is federal. And that's an insurance program where farms can buy into it at a certain level.
Yeah, but that's the insurance for the milk. There's a whole bunch of others, that stuff through NRCS that comes through deals with soil
Yeah.
and there's a whole bunch of programs.
We get water quality money from NRCS for helping to build things like, and then part of that's state money, part of that's federal money.
Yeah.
Part of that is match, but in terms of, I'm not aware of a centralized location where all of the.
No, I mean,
federal-
it's a good question, and I think it's a complicated question of all the state and federal resources that are available and then that get awarded in Vermont. So there's some that are in the water quality arena, there's some that's in the food system side, there's some that's in the, food literacy or ag education side. And there are resources that come from, a lot through
So if
USDA.
you're gonna apply for a grant to build fences on your land and do that. It's really, NRCS is over here, they've got a bunch of stuff.
Yep.
You've got smaller grants that are, I think, both federal and state money, but mostly federal money that is administered by you. Then there's a whole bunch of stuff, all the planning of all of, just in the fence area, you're required to go through at the university and extension, and they draw up the plan. So just in that area, when you, I get no feeling of what this all looks like. And quite frankly, when you're looking to appropriate money to this, it would be nice to know where the gaps are, and it's hard to know where the gaps are when you can't figure out where all the money's going.
That's a great point, and I think to that point, one of the reasons, or a key reason why these three sectors were identified is this infrastructure development that we're trying to build is not, there isn't a different source of money to do it. And so that is, I understand your point about it would be great to have a sort of comprehensive list. But I feel, again, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but we felt comfortable that these infrastructure needs are not being addressed by separate existing programs, which is a key reason why we believe they're appropriate for this appropriation. That doesn't diminish the importance of your point.
Well, quite frankly, if there are gaps and you're trying to move in there, it would be nice to have the facts to know that what we're supporting in there.
I mean, I'm happy to share what we do know about investments and remaining need within the meat, maple, and produce sectors, which that we have calculated. And I'll add that the recommendations that were included in the Future of Ag Commission report were built upon the huge collaborative effort that went into the Ag and Food System Strategic Plan that Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund and the agency co-led. And that process looked at, brought in, input from over 1,500 different Vermonters and many subject matter experts about where are the opportunities, where are the gaps, where are the challenges, where are the resources, where is the remaining need. And that's what the Future of Ag Commission used, was that data to further refine recommendations for where there was more resources needed. And that was where, in that Future of Ag Commission report, 2 areas were identified as those needs. One was in infrastructure investment, and the other was in remaining business technical assistance and support. And that was where then the recommend in the governor's budget for $10 million to support those meat, maple, and produce industry, and then $4 million to continue the work of the Working Lands Program. So that was built upon some of that data, Senator Weston, that you're referencing. I don't have, but I would love to be able to give you the figure that you're looking for, of sort of like how much has been invested collectively in agriculture, each year or in the past 10 years. But what I can share is that we looked at meat, maple, and produce specifically and determined how much we have invested in those sectors and what those infrastructure demand needs remain, and compared that to dairy as sort of like a base comparison. So in dairy, and actually, Steve, you were correct, the VCAP investment in dairy was 25 million, but a total of 27 million has been invested in the dairy industry in the last few years from a market industry development standpoint. And in comparison, we've invested 4.8 million in the produce industry, 4.1 million in meat industry, which includes both livestock and slaughter processing, and less than $1 million, only $730,000 in the maple sector. So that was looking at what federal resources have we managed at the agency, what dollars have we put out the door of state funds, and we also considered the USDA meat grants that were relatively new in the last couple of years to support that supply chain kind of breakdown that happened during COVID around meat products being processed. So in each of those sectors, we have not calculated for maple. So for produce and for meat, the infrastructure demand needs that are projected for the next 3 years are over $50 million per sector. So we can prove and can demonstrate that there's been nominal investments made in these diversified sectors and that significant infrastructure need remains as well. So it's only a partial answer to your question. It sort of speaks to those three industries individually.
Yeah, so from my viewpoint, the other thing Steve brought up, and life's full of irony, some of them aren't particularly pleasant. One of the ironic things I see is you're right, people that move from a certain place to Vermont, in many cases are moving here because of what we portray as sort of the cows in the pasture and the slower pace of life and all that kind of stuff. And yet, if you have too many of those folks moving, they're sort of contributing to the decline of what they actually came to see and enjoy. And it's, I don't know what other word to use except ironic, it just doesn't work very well. But if we have put in charge this big group that you belong to, Abby, and these are the results that you've come up with, these are the 3 areas in which we need to invest at the $10 million level, then I think we need to sort of trust those folks to their due diligence in terms of finding out, dairy aside, that wasn't addressed as one of the sectors. It's still going to be very important. I mean, 2.5 billion pounds of milk a year with fewer farms means someone's doing something right on that side. Unfortunately, it came at the expense of a whole bunch of smaller, and to your point, the rural communities suffer greatly when you might wind up having, I don't know what the number is, let's say it's 500 huge farms and not very many small ones anymore, which tends to bring people together in those rural communities and really is, just like I said, the fabric that brings people here. That's what they came here to take part in, and yet all too often it doesn't work very well. And I've used the analogy again of why would you move next to an airport and then expect that there'd be no planes landing or taking off? It just doesn't make any sense. Yeah, right.
Thanks. Abby, are we part of the 30 by 30, the New England Compact? Is that also something just to keep in mind around? Yeah. We're trying to produce 30% of, is it our food or regionally? Okay. And is there a Vermont specific compact also that we have goals?
Yes, so through the Farm to Plate network, there was the goal to have local food production and consumption in the state be 15%. We exceeded that objective this last year. I think we're at over 17% local. I'm kind of forgetting those figures right at the moment, but and so we've updated that objective to say that by 2030 will be at 25%.
Okay. It's just important to keep in mind as we're.
But yeah, those are moving in hand of sort of like thinking about the local food system development here in Vermont, and then how that will actually feed the regional food system initiative. And as Steve identified, Vermont and probably Maine will remain the production states for the Northeast region. So we are the states that have an agricultural culture. We have open landscape that can still be utilized for food production. And that puts both an opportunity and a responsibility on Vermont landowners and our landscape to be able to be a production state for the Northeast region, to be able to reach that 30% regionally producible.
If I can just tag on to that, one thing I forgot to mention was that we've lost a lot of agricultural land. So in our last USDA census, this was 2017, and the one before that was, so in 2017, we were actively farming 592,000 acres of land. 20 years earlier, in 1997, it was 701,000. So we lost 109,000 acres. We had almost 20% less land in 2017 than 1997. So it's not only the farms that are diminishing, we are losing agricultural land. And to your point about people moving in, I mean, the people moving in, if you're struggling as a farm and you can't support your family and you can't prosper in that rural community, you can sell it for real estate. And that is the push. That is the, when your land is worth so much more to be developed for housing,
Yeah.
there's that natural inclination. Once you develop that land,
Retirement, or, yeah.
once you build a subdivision there, it's not gonna ever be farmland again. And so that's part of the thing, is to keep the working lands active and to build that infrastructure that can support the diversification that we all believe is necessary to be able to do that.
Those are great points.
Oh, no, absolutely. Christina, I don't know if do you have anything else? You don't need to move, Steve, if you don't want to.
I'm happy to. I did want to say to your point, thank you for the compliment to the agency, but we all understand that we need you. I mean, honestly, without this committee and without the House committee, we couldn't do most of the things we do. We know you're advocates for agriculture. We just want you to be able to try to share our perspective with those competing interests, because we understand there are many worthy needs.
Yeah.
And so just trying to help share our perspective on that. But we know how much you support it, and we wouldn't be able to do anything without it. So thank you.
Or Abby, if you want to.
Yeah, maybe we might have.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, both.
Okay.
We'll share.
Get the experts up there.
I know we don't have a lot more time.
Well, we got till noon.
We have till noon, okay, great.
And we've got plenty to say. For the record, I'm Christina Sweet, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Agricultural Development Division at the Agency of Agriculture.
Yeah, and Abby Willard, Agency of Ag as well. I think Steve did do that nice deep dive into the, why this matters. I wanted to just back out to think about the Future of Ag Commission recommendations being focused on infrastructure investments and why those three sectors were identified. But I will say, dairy was also included in the recommendations from the Future of Ag Commission to focus on dairy innovation and market development, as well as transition planning for dairy. So much of that work is thankfully being provided as resources through the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center. So we have other resources, other federal dollars that are being focused on dairy development and innovation. But what we don't have are sufficient resources to invest in meat, maple, and produce. And so we can give you a little bit more specifics around kind of the economic impact and needs that have been identified in those three sectors, if that would be helpful.
That would be.
Okay.
But that gets back to, I know that in dairy, we have money coming.
Right.
And if I had a better picture of that, if the numbers would speak for themselves.
Yeah, and we can, I mean, we've shared that with this committee, and we can share it again of sort of like what's coming through the Dairy Innovation Center. It's like $38 million has been dedicated across the 11-state region towards dairy innovation and development. Obviously, a portion of that alone is sort of invested in Vermont businesses. So I think what before going into the three sectors, I want to just note, and you asked for this, Senator Westman, which is the governor's recommend included $14 million for both working lands appropriation and this new program. What passed out of the House was 50% of that, so only $7 million. The Working Lands Program continues to have its oversubscription every funding opportunity. So the last 3 years, I think I've shared before, we've had over 10 million in demand for that program. So that program supports all working lands businesses, including dairy and meat, maple, and produce, as well as forestry and wood manufacturing. But that program can only do so much, and it again turns down high quality applications because of the limited appropriation that program receives. So our hope was to have the 4 million for working lands plus there'll be another $1 million of ARPA dollars that are invested next year in the Working Lands Program to have a $5 million investment out of the Working Lands Program in fiscal year '24. And that was sort of an intentional vision and plan based upon the demand that we see towards Working Lands programming. The 10 million request that was very specifically targeting these 3 development sectors was also intentional, recognizing these are the 3 areas where we see growth potential, where we see real opportunity for new entrepreneurs to enter the marketplace. And in a sense, it could be about dairy, in that it could be a transition opportunity for dairy producers to transition out of dairy or add a diversified market to their business, and that's where they could maybe take. We heard a conversation of this just yesterday. We had a afternoon hearing Working Lands applicant pitches from 7 grantees that applied for more than $150,000 and up to $250,000 for a project. And one of those proposals was to support dairy farms to do the beef on dairy concept, which is sort of to breed dairy cows with beef genetics, grow beef babies, and still milk the cows and then raise those beef into for livestock for the meat industry. So there's this diversification opportunity that exists within the dairy sector as well. So maybe we can speak very specifically about the 3 sectors. So I think you know about the meat sector. We talked about it many times. We know the bottleneck that exists in processing. You know that producers are leaving the state of Vermont to process their animals. You know that the industry of livestock production
Really
is stifled by the lack of processing capacity. There were lots of federal grants that are recently invested in meat slaughter and processing. And what makes your question, Senator Westman, complicated is if you looked at the amount of resources that are available for meat slaughter and processing in the country, you'd say the industry is taken care of and Vermont will be fine. We've received 4 awards in Vermont totaling less than $1 million out of that, billions of dollars invested in meat slaughter and processing capacity. And it's because the applications are complicated. It's because the timing doesn't work for our industry. It's not appropriately scaled for Vermont. And so our producers have not been competitive in those applications. So while there was a lot of federal dollars targeting that need, it has not been efficient and effective for Vermont businesses. So 4 awards in Vermont focused on meat slaughter and processing have all those federal dollars. In the maple sector, so we know, I will say a little bit less about the maple sector than we may know about produce and livestock and meat processing. And I think that's because it has been a successful industry that we have not needed to sort of prop up and support in the same traditional ways that maybe we have other sectors of agriculture. But they're going through a renaissance of maple production. It's going from being hobby operations and backyard supplements to dairy to being huge industry opportunity, very technologically organized, very opportunity for growth and production expansion in ways that we haven't seen in the sector previously.
Can you say a little bit more about what you're seeing? I mean, I know the reverse osmosis stuff, but what else is, when you are talking like dynamic, innovative, what are you seeing out there?
I'll do my best to answer your question because
absolutely,
I'm not the maple expert, but we're seeing production just capacity expand beyond where we would have typically seen sort of 1,000 taps, 4,000 taps. I mean, even my brother's operation, when we started sugaring as a family, had a few thousand taps, and he's now 15,000 taps and has changed his whole internal boiling system twice in the last 3 years.
So he just bought other sugar bushes
so buying
around
more
in
land,
different,
putting in multiple reverse
Getting ready for
osmosis
this,
systems, going from wood fired
A lot
to
of leasing.
electric.
a lot of leasing.
Yeah, they lease a lot of land. Yeah,
Okay.
I think just, and the technology is changing so rapidly.
Yeah.
So that now he's doing, just as one example, they're doing like a super concentrate. So rather than just running the sap through the reverse osmosis system once and getting from like 2% sugar content to 5%, he's running it through 2 or 3 times and getting to 15% sugar content, which allows him to store the sap for 3 or 4 days. He boils 1/3 as many times. He's using 1/3 as much electricity. or propane.
Yeah.
And producing, 600 gallons in a boil, which is just an unbelievable kind of new industry than what.
And it
used to be
seems
done.
like it's on the menu more than ever
And then-
in different
right.
things.
And so then the
Fish
marketing,
with
yeah,
maple,
it's not just been,
Expansion of product.
expansion.
But
Yeah, yeah.
all of what you're talking about in every is the technology for all of this has
Right.
changed.
Yeah.
You know, to your, all I can think of is my family and going back to all your stories about the 20s. There was a bull tanks.
Right.
Yeah.
And bull tanks came and waked out half of the 18,000
Yeah.
farms went with bull tanks. You know, but
And I
it's
think that-
all,
yeah.
all the technology. When I was a kid, we farmed it, we sugared with buckets.
Sure.
14,000 buckets. And it's all pipeline.
and one of the, I think, advancements in the maple industry has been a lot of the food safety considerations, which had not been as attentive in the sugaring industry until recently. So we were just visiting with the Maple Sugar Makers Association and talking about their sugar house safety certification program. And they have this assessment process or an audit that happens of a sugaring operation, and then there's recommendations for improvement. And oftentimes it's you need to move from wastewater grade PVC piping to all food grade PVC piping. Or, most all lead has been removed from
Yeah.
sugaring operations, but they might have copper piping, which is not food grade. Or they may have fittings that have copper that need to be removed and replaced. And so again, things evolving so quickly within the maple sector, and they still have high labor, they still have high energy costs, they struggle with packaging
Yeah,
options.
the
and
packaging thing is
flexibility.
interesting
Yeah.
to me. I get it. You don't want to send maple syrup at Christmas time across country in glass.
Right.
So I get the plastic.
And they
piece.
do, but it's just like such a
Yeah.
It's such a
packaging
pack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
adjustment.
The other thing I'll just mention, if you don't mind,
Yeah.
down in Bennington, one of our biggest concerns with that PFAS outbreak was getting PFAS into, that it would get into syrup.
Yeah.
And I don't know where that conversation is, but I know that with all agricultural soils, and we passed a bill yesterday that again helps us work toward keeping PFAS out of our community. Sooner or later, I'm afraid we're just gonna get to the point where people are gonna be testing the soil to see if there's PFAS in it. It's gonna be, you can't farm it, we don't wanna use it, so.
Yeah, I don't think we know the extent to that.
Yeah.
So I guess the only piece that I'll add on the maple side is just recognizing they are in need of road improvements and other land improvements around water access or electrical access.
And they use these dollars for tourism.
Yes,
Okay.
and then doing the marketing, which I
Yeah.
think speaks to thinking of maple syrup as more than just a condiment for your breakfast, but actually thinking of it as, a food staple in every pantry. I think has sort of been the language that the industry is starting to
I
move
love
towards.
this.
Yeah, it is really nice. But that takes a lot of marketing
It
and
does,
engagement, and
it
that's,
does,
a lot of, what's happening right now during the Maple Open House weekends. The sugar house near my house had cars all the way down the road, and my first reaction was like, why are they there? But
Love it.
they've never seen
Love
it,
it.
they've not had maple
Yeah.
syrup or sugar on snow, they haven't
Love
seen
it.
a boiling
Yeah.
operation
great.
happen, and so it is wonderful to kind of have that exposure. So anyway, so that's kind of the maple industry. I think there's a lot more that that industry needs than we have helped promote and market for them. And certainly thinking on the infrastructure side, it's a constantly moving target. Christina's worked in the produce industry for a long time, so I'm gonna have Christina speak to the
Right, so I'm
produce.
happy to talk a little bit about the produce industry today. I've worked really closely with Vermont's fruit and vegetable growers for the past 8 years. And this is one of Vermont's larger, after dairy and maple, I believe, the largest industry, representing over 448 million in annual sales from the 2017 ag census. So we're really looking forward to getting that 2022 ag census data soon. We know it's grown. For example, the Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers Association member farms have grown from only 150 in 2008 to over 400 in 2022. So this is really an industry where folks are moving to Vermont and starting a new farm to grow fruits and vegetables.
Great.
So, working with these growers, we have over 600 vegetable and fruit farms at this point. maybe more, but unlike with the dairy industry, we don't have a registration for these farms. So we know we have at least 600 that have shared their information voluntarily with us. And I've been really struck working with so many of them about their dedication to providing high quality fresh fruits and vegetables, their innovation, finding ways to extend the season and allowing us to eat fresh green vegetables almost all year round, finding ways to innovate in storage so that we can eat an apple that tastes fresh, 8 months after it was harvested, or get root vegetables from our local farmers all year round. But they're coming up against a lot of major infrastructure challenges. And as these farmers diversify the working landscape, they really need to be able to build and improve, especially in their areas where they're washing, packing, and storing produce to be able to meet growing demand from local and regional markets. So many produce growers around the state are operating out of former dairy barns. Might not be the most obvious choice for where you want to store your fresh fruits and vegetables, but these are, this is the land they have, these are the buildings they have. And these, buildings pose a lot of operational efficiency challenges, operational and worker safety challenges, and food safety challenges. There are we've seen a lot of barns where it's really easy for birds to get in and roost. Sure. And those are just some of the issues that farmers are coming up against. And food safety, as you can imagine, is really important for fresh fruits and vegetables, like it is for all of the food we consume, but especially when we're consuming food raw that doesn't have another kill step. So I've seen with, working with our small grants that we've had occasionally available to farmers, like our produce safety improvement grants, I've seen them transform really small areas of their farms. For example, going from an area where they have no, where they're really washing and packing produce out in the open to having, or under a pop-up tent, to having a covered structure or an enclosed structure. And these are huge improvements for operational efficiency, for food safety. I've had farmers say, wow, I didn't think a food safety project would be great for staff morale, but it's been the best thing we've done for our workers, being able to come to work, be really proud of how clean and organized their work area is, and really wanting to maintain that organization over time. But these grants, $10,000, $15,000 grants have really just been able to put a tiny dent in the overall infrastructure need for many of these farmers, especially when farmers are able want to grow into regional markets. So we know that for many of our members of Deep Root Organic Co-op, our vegetable growing co-op within the state, they are really expanding into regional markets in Boston and New York City, but they need to be able to have more storage space, loading docks, cross-docking locations in some cases, to really be able to move and meet that demand for Vermont fruits and vegetables in our regional metro markets. I was really thinking about this morning, thinking, if we were on like Family Feud and you walked up to a person on the street and you said, what food do you associate with Vermont? I think a lot of people would name a dairy product and say cheese or ice cream. A lot of people would probably say maple, but I think a lot of people would say kale also. We are known for our high quality fruits and vegetables.
Yeah.
And the farmers that we work with are ready to grow. They're ready to get more local food into our mouths till we can meet that 2030 goal of having 25% of our food production or food consumption be local. They want to get more food into schools and into hospitals around the state and regionally, and they want to get more food to our consumers in Boston, New York, and other metro areas. So I'm happy to answer any more questions about the industry or some of these infrastructure needs, but they're really we really are at an inflection point with this industry, and to grow, they need to be able to overcome some of these infrastructure challenges and really invest in projects that might be $100,000, $200,000 projects to transform the operating space.
Questions? So besides maple and dairy, what's the biggest crop?
Produce is, I think, the third largest.
Apples, I would assume.
Apples?
Yeah.
That's an assumption, I'm not.
And it's interesting, so for our data, we have all of our produce farms kind of in one database. And of those, 620 some farms, 44 have orchard in the name. So we don't quite have, and those are not necessarily the only orchards, but the apple industry definitely represents a lot of produce in terms of sales and in terms of volume, but not necessarily, it's a smaller portion of our total farms. Most of our produce farms in the state are diversified vegetable and berry farms.
just say to you in your thinking when you're doing this, this committee's gonna weigh in with appropriations on spending. What's going to end up is a conference committee with 3 members from the Senate and 3 members from the House.
Right.
And the House is going to defend what they've done. And if the Senate chooses to do something separate from them, it's a discussion back and forth. So what you're doing is portray an alternative to what they've already put in. And it's that process. So as you put together a sheet comparing and doing it, if you could keep that in mind, that would be helpful.
That's a good point, yeah.
Mhm.
Those committees, I've only been on 2 or 3, look for the middle, the compromise, the thing that we can get done so that we can leave that room and report back.
Well, yes, and the Appropriations Committee in the House took the recommendations from their committees that apparently, and they have to go back and answer to them. So, this is a process in that. I've been on committees where when you come in with some information that looks overwhelming, people give, and there's a back and forth to that. But you only got half of what you asked for in the House.
Right.
And somebody on those committees must believe they have better ideas than you do. So, we're gonna have to, and we're gonna have some different ideas.
Good.
This committee's got a few things that we've got on this, so.
Sure. I think related to that, and we can include this in the document that you've requested. I think there's a misconception that small farms need significant resources. I think there's a belief that if you're a small farm, that you don't need a grant or financial assistance in excess of $100,000. Or, pick a number, but that when the concept of this food producers and value added processors concept was proposed with a award cap at $500,000, I think there was a misalignment of both need and fit assigned to that dollar figure. And Steve said the vision of the program was to have it has evolved to now have 2 tiers of funding, that there would be some awards in the 100 to 250,000 range and others greater than 250 to 500. And we have ongoing examples of small scale farms that are requesting infrastructure grant funds of 250,000 and contributing an equal amount in match, which means that these projects are $500,000 or greater. And these are small to medium-sized farms that are either, can be dairy farms that are milking 400 cows, or can be a produce operation that grows on 50
A dairy
acres.
farm with 20 cows that's going to make cheese,
That's right.
and they probably can't do anything for less than 6 or 7.
Right. So I believe part of what we have done to ourselves is by having so few resources to invest in agriculture, we have dropped the ceiling of what grant award caps can be to say we can only give grants at $25,000 or only $50,000 to sort of spread the dollars to a wider number of grantees. And as a consequence, I think we've been messaging inadvertently that these small and mid-sized scale farms don't need significant investments, and they do. And I think that that's been part of what our messaging has been this session, and will continue to be, is the true need that exists out there, even at these small and mid-scale size, maybe even most critically at these small and mid-scale sizes, they're making these like big investments and big risks in the marketplace to grow or diversify or add something new.
I hate to dominate the conversation, but what I'd say is the way you can combat ignorance which a lot of us have preconceived notions and are ignorant about it. The way you combat that is with facts.
Yeah.
And that's why we ask for it, because if we're going up against people that, you know, in advocating positions, the more facts you have, the more successful.
Yeah, and I'll share, we can share facts and they still may not be heard,
That,
right?
that's absolutely true, and I
Yeah.
don't argue that a bit, but the only way to try to get grounded in stuff is with facts.
Yeah, and that's that, yeah, being persistent, for sure.
So on another note, I know all of us here are happy that Senator Welch sits on the Agriculture Committee in the US Congress.
Yeah.
And while it certainly will take, well, carefully, so Peter, it may take more time than he has to reach the level that Senator Leahy did. And he was, I mean, we're never gonna be in a similar position that we were when Senator Leahy was there. So, you know, we're very grateful for all that he did all those years. But it's still, if you're on that committee, you still have at least some ability to direct the discussion and hopefully funds toward us. And so I'm looking forward to working with him as well. And I know you guys are too.
Yeah, and we've met with Senator Welch's staff and the senator himself, primarily around the Farm Bill.
Yeah.
At least, you know, 2 or 3 times already this year to talk about the priorities that we see. And it's often about scaling programs that work for Vermont-sized industry, you know, rather than building national programs, actually doing more regional or state level block funding so that you're putting the resources closer to the subject matter experts that know what the industry needs are within their communities. And have many of these same infrastructure need conversations with the senator as well.
And I think he gets it. I think he really does understand agriculture. So.
It's not his fault, but when you look at it, that Senate seat that George Aiken had, that Pat Leahy inherited, we had 2 people in that seat over 85 years. It's kind of hard to replicate
Yeah, you
that.
never. Once a lifetime.
And seniority means something.
It does.
That is amazing. Two individuals in 85 years.
In 85 years. Aiken got elected in 38 and left in the 70s.
Yeah.
And Leahy took over and left in January of this year. We're at 86 years, I guess. That's a long time.
You're in a similar position this body.
No, he is.
Yeah, he certainly is, and Senator Mazza. I include you in that. Anyone else have anything?
No.
Thank you very
Okay,
much.
no, thank you. This was very valuable, very helpful, and as Senator Westman said, our next job will be to craft a letter to the Appropriations Committee and indicate that we look forward to a conference committee with good results.
Yeah, sounds good.
So thanks. Okay.
Thank you all so
I think,
much.